to start this morning with, I brought my little meditation bell with me. And this bell, it's from Japan originally, but I had an opportunity last year to go to Deer Park, or to Plum Village, in France. And this is a bell that I brought back from Plum Village, so it, to me, holds a lot of the things that I received from the 21-day retreat there, and the things that I was able to participate in there. So I wanted to invite us all just to take maybe 3 breaths this morning with the sound of this bell. And if you'd like to just sit quietly, you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to. Some people like to close their eyes. But before I begin my Dharma message today, I thought we could just settle, and then it also helps me to settle and to get more grounded before I offer a Dharma message. So I'll invite 3 sounds of the bell. With body, speech, and mind in perfect oneness, I send my heart along with the sound of this bell. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and transcend the path of anxiety and sorrow. Thank you. Please join me in Gasho. So good morning, and this, I think it might be the second week of Dharma School, is that right? Okay, so welcome back to the kids that are back here today. This morning I was going to offer, what I'd like to offer is a portion of something that I participated in last month. In August, I was invited to be on an interfaith panel, and for those of you not familiar, an interfaith panel is a group of people from different religions or different faiths who are invited to speak on a particular topic. And so I was a part of that. There were 7 different faiths or religions who participated in this talk. The topic was racism, and it was sponsored by Pax Christi, which is a nonprofit international group that was started in France a long, long time ago, I think in the 1930s or 40s. And part of their path is the path of nonviolence, and also to be socially active, to be active in the community. So we had participants from the Baha'i faith, from Buddhism, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh community, and it was a mother and a son, a teenage son, who came to speak, and then someone from the Unitarian Universalist church. And we all expressed our perspectives. And so they gave us 4 questions to reflect on over the course of about a month prior. And I was so happy that they gave us the questions first so that we could all reflect on them in our own particular ways and with our own particular backgrounds and practices. And they gave us what the definition that they wanted to work with regard to the definition of racism. And their definition was that racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based upon a belief of one's race as superior. And so we all kind of sat with that, and also the participants, the audience, did too, because they were able to listen to that definition as well. And for me, I would add to that it also includes power, so prejudice and power over another group. So this morning I wanted to just, for this first part of the Dharma message, is just to talk about the 2 questions that they offered us, and then for the second part during our adult time to delve a little bit further into those 2 other questions, because there were 4 questions total. And I was speaking to a group that might not have been that familiar with Buddhism or with what some of our main tenets of Buddhism are. So The challenge for me was to give a really succinct and simple way of explaining our Buddhist practice in universal terms. And by the way, you only have 2 to 3 minutes per question to do that. So I practiced, and then I decided, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to have to time this just to see if they're very, very strict with the time. So the first question was, what is the root cause of racism? And so I talked a little bit about the main tenets of Buddhism, being impermanence and interconnection, and that all sentient beings are constantly changing and intimately connected. And I'm so happy that, Elaine, that you asked us to read the Golden Chain this morning, because that was kind of like my guiding, my guiding force in presenting a response to these questions. Because from the time I was about 5 years old, we were reciting the Golden Chain at our temple in Sacramento. And it reads a little bit differently than our version now, but that's been sort of my guiding light of like, I'm a link in this chain of love that stretches around the world, and it's my responsibility to keep my link bright and strong. So I'll go into that a little bit more later. But I talked about impermanence and interconnection, and the other caveat I want to add here is that I wasn't really that nervous, because we had almost 20 friends who came out to support and to be present. So thank you for those of you who were able to come. It really helped me to see a VBT temple table there of just representation. So that was really helpful for me. So I also said that because we're not separate, we practice generating loving kindness and compassion to all beings to awaken to our true nature. We recognize that we can change and heal and transform for the benefit of all beings. So to continue on, what is the root cause of racism? As I reflected deeply on that question over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, racism is a part of our history in the United States. Our country was built upon excluding others. Groups of people have been and continue to be excluded through discrimination, explicit and implicit bias, and institutional racism. It's painful and uncomfortable to talk about and to face. We became a nation of innovation and creativity and invention, so many inventions. And we are interconnected with colonialism, with the slavery of Black people, genocide of Native Indigenous people, and exclusion laws. We carry what I consider trauma or scars or wounds in our bodies. And I believe that it's the trauma of our ancestors that has been untended. So today we understand through neuroscience and research and genetics and epigenetics that untended trauma like PTSD and like adverse childhood experiences, they live in our body, and they can have serious long-term chronic health effects. So I believe that our history resides in our bodies, and I think intergenerational trauma and the scars of racism are alive in all of us. And I noticed that in the book that we're reading for a book group this month, called Mindful of Race, some of you may have picked it up. It's by Ruth King, and she's a Dharma teacher in the Insight tradition. She has a quote that really resonated with me as I was preparing for this talk. She says, none of us is immune to racism because none of us are immune to history. And that really rang true for me, that the causes and the conditions of our lives are interconnected, and we carry the collective joys and the collective pains of our history. So all of us as individuals and as groups, all of us black-bodied and brown-bodied people and white-bodied people, we carry our full history in our bodies. And the second question that they asked the panel was, why do you think that we keep repeating our painful history of racism and racial bias? And that also was, it was a question that I was trying not to respond to quickly and literally, because I think that the way that the questions were formed, as the questions were formed and as we got deeper into the conversation, it allowed for more expansion and spaciousness to consider. So my response was that we think of ourselves as individuals, and specifically I think in our country we like pride ourselves in our individualness, individuation. And as individuals, our thoughts and actions are independent of anyone else's. And how we live today has no connection to history, it has no bearing, because history is separate. It's in the past, right? It doesn't include us because we weren't there. However, when we look a little deeper, our ancestors and our future descendants are really present in us. And when we look deeper, when I look deeper, I can see that I can heal for my ancestors and my descendants, for both my ancestors who are no longer here, and for my children, and hopefully someday my children's children. And I think that just personally, I've done a little bit of that in recognizing, becoming more aware of the conditions that my family lived through during World War II. The painful and the shame that I felt in my heart of being a descendant of people who were incarcerated during World War II. And just coming to terms with that as I'm 59 years old now, and just coming to those terms of how painful that was to not be able to talk to my parents about it or my grandparents about it. And so I carry this inside of my body. I know that it's alive in me, and I know that it's alive in my children. So that's the way that I looked more deeply at it. So Buddhism, the practice of Buddhism has really taught me that if I'm able to heal for my children and for my descendants, and also to help heal for my ancestors. And that type of healing, there's a transformation that can occur. And through that transformation, we talk about liberation in Buddhism. And liberation to me is like true freedom and spaciousness. To be able to look at all beings with our sense of interconnection. So as I complete this portion of my sharing this morning, my message this morning, I ended with an invitation to the group. And I'd like to share that with you this morning if you'd like to participate. And if you don't want to, it's up to you. You don't have to. So this is an exercise that I learned from one of my teachers, one of my beloved teachers. Many of you know that I studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, and he still continues to inform my way of understanding Buddhism. And I was lucky enough to be and participate in a retreat many, many years ago, decades ago now, with him. And he offered this teaching. And so it goes something like this. If you look deeply in the palm of your hand, either hand, your left hand or your right hand, if you look deeply into the palm of your hand, you will see your parents and all generations of your ancestors. All of them are alive in this moment. Each is present in your body, and you are the continuation of these people. We are a continuation. We are their continuation. And when Thich Nhat Hanh was offering this teaching, he said he came to see this as a truth for himself because his mother had just passed away when he was very, like a young adult, a young person. And he was missing his mother so much, and he didn't feel like he could really go on until one day when he was looking at the palm of his hand and he said, she's alive inside of me. Everything that I do, everything that I touch has the elements of my mother. So it's the clouds in the sky, it's the sun shining outside, so there's that connection. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to know that we are still all connected to our ancestors, to our history, and to our future descendants. And in closing, this morning, I wanted to share a little bit of the golden chain that really spoke to me, because as I mentioned, when I was 5 years old, maybe even younger, we used to recite that every Sunday. I am a link in Amita's golden chain of love. So I was just going to suggest that if you want to take out your service book and maybe we can all read that together with the insight or the reflection of that we are all really connected and that we all have the potential to heal from our past. I think it was on page 8, is that right? The golden chain. I am a link in Anita's golden chain of love that stretches around the world. I will keep my link bright and strong. May I be kind and gentle to every living thing and protect all who are weaker than myself. May I think pure and beautiful thoughts, say pure and beautiful words, and do pure and beautiful deeds. May every link in Amita's golden chain of love be bright and strong, and may we all attain perfect peace. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Buddhaya.